I'm Alan, 23 years old, and I've spent a decade pouring my heart into woodworking. My tools weren't just equipment, they were my future, my connection to my grandfather, and my path to independence. My parents seemed supportive of my dream until my birthday last week, when I discovered my entire workshop had been emptied. What followed was the most painful betrayal I've ever experienced, forcing me to make a decision that changed everything. Before I share what really happened with that shed overnight, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button to support stories of standing up for yourself. My love affair with woodworking began when I was 12 years old. My grandfather Harold was a master craftsman who could transform raw lumber into works of art with just his hands and a few specialized tools. I still remember the first time he invited me into his workshop, the rich smell of sawdust hanging in the air, the organized chaos of his workbench, and the pride in his eyes as he placed a small hammer in my palm. "This craft is in your blood, Alan," he told me with a weathered smile. "I knew it the moment I saw how you studied my hands when I worked." Every weekend after that, I'd ride my bike 5 miles to Grandpa Harold's house, eager to learn whatever he was willing to teach me. He started me with simple projects, a basic birdhouse, a small trinket box for my mom, coasters for our living room. Each creation, however flawed, filled me with a sense of accomplishment I'd never experienced before. On my 13th birthday, Grandpa Harold presented me with my first toolkit. It wasn't fancy, just a collection of beginner's tools in a wooden box he'd crafted himself, but to me, it was everything. The box was engraved with my name and the words, "Build your dreams," along the edge. "These tools are just the beginning," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Take care of them, and they'll help you build a future." For 4 wonderful years, I absorbed everything my grandfather could teach me. His patience was endless, his knowledge vast. We built furniture for my parents' house, a coffee table, bookshelves, even a rocking chair for my mom. Each project grew more ambitious as my skills developed. Under his guidance, I learned to see the potential in every piece of wood, to understand grain patterns, to measure twice and cut once. When I was 16, Grandpa Harold passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. His loss left a gaping hole in my life, but his passion lived on through me. At the reading of his will, I was stunned to discover he'd left me $5,000 with a note that simply read, "For the tools you'll need." That money became sacred to me. I researched every purchase meticulously, buying only professional-grade tools that would last a lifetime. Each acquisition was a deliberate investment in my future. A high-quality table saw, a precision router, specialized chisels imported from Sweden, a planer that could transform rough-cut lumber into smooth, workable pieces. Every tool represented hours of research and saving, combining Grandpa's seed money with earnings from mowing lawns and later working at the local hardware store. By the time I graduated high school, I had assembled a collection that many professional woodworkers would envy. Instead of following my friends to college, I enrolled in a trade school to formally study furniture making and carpentry. My parents, especially my father Richard, seemed puzzled by my choice. "There's no real money in manual trades," Dad would say. He was a financial analyst who believed success could only be measured in college degrees and corporate promotions. "You should focus on something practical." My mother Elizabeth was gentler in her skepticism. "We just want you to be able to support yourself, honey," she would say, though I noticed how she proudly displayed the walnut jewelry box I'd made for her birthday. My younger brother Kyle took a more traditional path. A straight-A student now studying business at the State University, he was everything my father hoped for in a son. Where I felt most alive in a workshop covered in sawdust, Kyle thrived in classrooms and debate clubs. I never resented him for it, we were just different. After finishing trade school, I made the decision to live at home temporarily. The financial logic was sound. Save on rent while building my client base and saving for a proper workshop. I transformed our backyard shed into a functional workspace, spending nearly $2,000 of my own money on insulation, electrical wiring, and proper ventilation. What had once stored gardening equipment and holiday decorations became a sacred space where I could create. For the past 2 years, I'd worked part-time at Monarch Woodcraft, a high-end carpentry shop owned by Frank Delgado, a master craftsman who recognized my potential. The job gave me access to industrial equipment I couldn't yet afford, while still allowing time to build my own client base. Evenings and weekends were dedicated to commissions, custom shelving units, restored antique furniture, handcrafted dining tables for young couples furnishing their first homes. Word of my craftsmanship spread, mostly through referrals and a small Instagram page showcasing my work. I wasn't getting rich, but I was building something meaningful. A reputation for quality, attention to detail, and reasonable prices. Every dollar I earned went either back into tools and materials or into my savings account labeled Alan's Workshop Fund. By the time my 23rd birthday approached, I'd accumulated nearly $30,000, enough to seriously consider leasing a small commercial space and launching my business officially. I'd even started researching locations and drafting a business plan. The dream that had begun in Grandpa Harold's workshop was tantalizingly close to becoming reality. The night before my birthday, I finished a commissioned walnut desk for a local writer, my largest solo project to date. As I applied the final coat of finish, I felt a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. 23 felt significant, the age when I would transition from apprentice to master, from hobbyist to entrepreneur. I went to bed that night filled with hope and excitement for the future that awaited me. I had no idea that everything I'd worked for was about to be yanked away in an instant. I woke up on my birthday feeling optimistic. 23 felt like a turning point, old enough to be taken seriously as a craftsman, but young enough to have endless possibilities ahead. The morning sunlight streamed through my blinds as I stretched and checked my phone, smiling at the birthday messages from friends and clients. The house was unusually quiet as I made my way downstairs. Typically, my mother made a fuss over birthdays, special breakfasts, a small pile of presents at the table, balloons taped to the back of the birthday person's chair. But today, the kitchen held an odd tension. Dad sat at the table, coffee mug in hand, with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between smugness and discomfort. Mom stood by the stove, flipping pancakes with mechanical precision, not turning when I entered. "Morning," I said, trying to gauge the atmosphere. "Everything okay?" "Happy birthday, son," Dad replied, his voice overly cheerful. "Your mother and I have something special planned." Mom finally turned, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Happy birthday, Alan. Breakfast is almost ready." I took my seat, watching as Mom placed a stack of blueberry pancakes in front of me, my favorite since childhood. There was a single candle stuck in the top. No wrapped presents waited nearby. No card propped against the syrup bottle. "Thanks, Mom," I said, trying to hide my confusion. Dad cleared his throat. "So, Alan, 23, nearly a quarter century." He chuckled at his own joke. "Your mother and I have been talking, and we think it's time for some changes around here." The way he emphasized changes sent a chill down my spine. "What kind of changes?" I asked, fork suspended midway to my mouth. "We'll discuss that after breakfast," Mom interjected quickly. "Eat while it's hot." The meal passed in awkward silence. My appetite had vanished, but I forced myself to eat, knowing whatever changes my parents had planned weren't going to be in my favor. After breakfast, Dad pushed back from the table. "We have a surprise for you, son. Why don't you go check your workshop?" My heart rate quickened. A surprise in my workshop? Had they finally recognized my commitment? Perhaps they'd bought that specialized lathe I'd been researching for months. I hurried across the backyard to my converted shed. The morning dew soaked through my slippers, but I barely noticed. As I approached, something felt wrong. The padlock I always secured the door with was missing. I pulled the door open and froze. Empty. Completely empty. Where my workbench had stood was nothing but dust outlines on the floor. The walls, once lined with pegboards holding my carefully organized tools, were bare. My table saw, planer, router table, lathe all gone. Even the wood rack in the corner that had held thousands of dollars in specialty hardwoods was empty. For several seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. Had I been robbed? Was this some elaborate birthday prank? I spun around to find my parents standing behind me, watching my reaction. What happened? I managed to choke out. "Where's all my stuff? Did someone break in?" Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. "No one broke in, Alan. Your mother and I sold your tools." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You what?" "It's for the family fund," he continued, as if he were explaining something perfectly reasonable. "Kyle's tuition just increased, and the house needs a new roof before winter. We had to make some hard decisions." "You sold my tools without asking me?" My voice rose with each word. "Those were mine. I spent years collecting them. Now, Alan, Mom stepped in, her voice placating. You're still young. You can replace them eventually. Replace them? I was shouting now, unable to contain my rage and disbelief. Do you have any idea how much money was in this room? How long it took me to save for that equipment? Dad's expression hardened. Don't take that tone. You don't need all those fancy tools anyway. You'll get new ones someday if you're serious about this hobby. Hobby? The word felt like an insult. This isn't a hobby, Dad. This is my career, my business. I had $15,000 worth of tools in here. We got $5,000 for the lot, Dad said, as if that should make me feel better. The buyer came yesterday while you were at work, said we could have gotten more if some of them weren't so specialized. I felt physically ill. $5,000? That's it? You sold $15,000 worth of professional equipment for $5,000? It was the best offer we could get on short notice, Mom said weakly. Short notice? I ran my hands through my hair, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what they'd done. Why was there any notice at all? These weren't your tools to sell. Dad's face flushed with anger. You live in our house, Alan. Everything under our roof is ultimately our property. That's not how property law works, I countered, thinking of all the receipts I had carefully saved. I paid for those tools. Some were gifts from Grandpa Harold. You had no right. Your grandfather would understand family comes first, Dad said dismissively. Kyle needs to finish his degree. That takes precedence over your woodworking toys. That's when something snapped inside me. Those toys were my future, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. You just sold my future. Dad straightened his posture, his face reddening. Don't be dramatic. You're 23 years old. You can stay here, get a real job with your trade school certificate, and save up for new tools. Maybe this is the push you need to get serious about life. I am serious about life, I said, clenching my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I've been building a business while working a job and saving every penny. Those tools represented years of investment. You can start over, Dad said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Plenty of people have setbacks. Consider this, a life lesson. A life lesson? I repeated incredulously. What's the lesson here? Don't trust your parents? Don't expect basic respect for your property? Mom placed a hand on my arm. Alan, please. We did what we had to do for the family. I jerked away from her touch. No, you did what was easiest. You could have asked me. I would have helped with Kyle's tuition. I would have contributed to the roof. But you didn't even give me that choice. You live under my roof, Dad said, his voice rising again. While that's the case, you'll respect my decisions. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never fully recognized before. He had never respected my choices, my passion, or my vision for my life. To him, I was still a child, playing with tools, not a skilled craftsman building a future. Your roof, I echoed, a cold clarity settling over me. You're right about one thing, Dad. I do live under your roof. I paused, meeting his gaze directly. But not for much longer. I stormed back to my bedroom, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the family photos in the hallway. My hands were shaking with rage, with shock, with an overwhelming sense of violation. I sank onto my bed and buried my face in my hands, trying to process what had just happened. My tools. My beautiful, carefully selected tools. Each one represented countless hours of research, saving, and deliberate choice. The Swedish chisels that could pare away wood with surgical precision. The Japanese pull saw that cut with such clean efficiency. The router with interchangeable bases that had taken me 6 months to save for. Beyond their monetary value, which was substantial, many held irreplaceable sentimental worth. The hand planes that had belonged to Grandpa Harold. The first professional-grade table saw I'd purchased with his inheritance money. The specialty measuring tools given to me by Frank when I completed my first year at Monarch Woodcraft. All gone, sold to a stranger for a fraction of their value, without my knowledge or consent. I took several deep breaths, forcing myself to think rationally despite the emotional hurricane inside me. I needed to document everything. Grabbing my laptop, I created a spreadsheet and began cataloging every tool that had been in that shed. Brand, model, condition, approximate value, and when and how I'd acquired it. Next to each item, I added notes about whether I had receipts or other proof of ownership. 3 hours later, I had a comprehensive inventory showing over $15,000 in equipment. Almost 80% of it I could prove I'd purchased myself or received as gifts. The documentation would be crucial if I decided to pursue legal action, though the thought of suing my own parents made me physically ill. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus, my best friend since high school, and one of the few people who truly understood what my craft meant to me. "Dude, happy birthday," he answered cheerfully. "Marcus," I said, my voice cracking. "Something happened. Something bad." I explained the situation, my words tumbling out in an angry, hurt rush. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally swearing under his breath as the magnitude of the betrayal became clear. "Those bastards," he finally said when I finished. "That's theft, man. Straight-up theft." "I know," I said, pacing the limited floor space of my childhood bedroom. "I don't even know what to do. I can't work without my tools. I have commissions I need to finish. Clients expecting deliveries." "You can use my garage," Marcus offered immediately. "It's not insulated like your workshop, but there's power and space, and you can crash on my couch if you need to get out of there." His immediate support brought the first sense of relief I'd felt since discovering the empty workshop. "Thanks, man. I might take you up on that." After hanging up, I called Frank at Monarch Woodcraft. As my boss and mentor, he needed to know why I might not be able to handle my usual workload. His reaction was even more vehement than Marcus's. "They did what?" he bellowed through the phone. "Alan, that's completely unacceptable. Those tools were your livelihood." "I know," I said, feeling a lump form in my throat at his validation. "I'm trying to figure out what to do now." "First thing, you come in tomorrow and we'll work out a schedule to give you more hours if you need them," Frank said decisively. "Second, you can use the shop equipment after hours for your personal projects until you get back on your feet. And third, I know some lawyers who could send a strongly worded letter about the legal implications of selling someone else's property." Frank's practical support gave me a lifeline to cling to. I wouldn't have to abandon my commissions entirely. I could continue working, albeit under much more difficult circumstances. As I sat contemplating my next move, I heard my parents' voices drifting up from downstairs. Creeping to my door, I opened it a crack to listen. "We should put $2,000 toward Kyle's tuition and use the rest for the roof deposit," Dad was saying. "We'll have to finance the remainder, but at least this gives us a start." "Richard, I'm still not comfortable with how we handled this," Mom replied, her voice tinged with doubt. "Maybe we should have talked to Alan first." "And have him guilt us about his grandfather's tools?" Dad scoffed. "He needs to grow up, Elizabeth. Kyle is getting a real education that will lead to a real career. Alan needs to understand that his little woodworking phase isn't a priority." "Phase." Mom sounded uncertain. "He's been doing this for years, Richard, and he's good at it. Really good. Being good at a hobby doesn't make it a viable career," Dad dismissed. "If he wants to make furniture on weekends after he gets a proper job, fine. But we're not going to enable this fantasy of his at the expense of Kyle's future." I closed my door silently, a cold determination replacing the raw anger I'd felt earlier. My father had made his position crystal clear. My passion, my skills, my dream, none of it had value in his eyes. I was a disappointment to be managed, not a son to be supported. In that moment, I made my decision. I wouldn't beg for understanding from people who were incapable of giving it. I wouldn't try to explain the difference between a hobby and a calling to someone who had already dismissed everything I cared about. I would leave. Tonight, pulling out a duffel bag, I began methodically sorting through my belongings, selecting only what was essential and unmistakably mine. Clothes, personal electronics, the small box of woodworking books I kept in my room, photos, important documents like my birth certificate and social security card. As I packed, I formulated a plan. I would wait until my parents were asleep. Marcus would help me move my belongings. I'd take only what was indisputably mine, leaving behind anything purchased by my parents. I'd withdraw my savings first thing in the morning, before my father could think to try accessing it. Most importantly, I would salvage what remained of my dignity and self-respect. I might have lost my tools, but I refused to lose my sense of self-worth as well. The house fell silent just after 11. Dad always went to bed early to be fresh for his morning commute, and Mom usually followed soon after. I lay fully dressed on my bed, watching the minutes tick by on my phone, giving them time to fall deeply asleep before making my move. At midnight, I sent a text to Marcus. "Ready when you are." His reply came immediately. "On my way. 20 minutes." I slid off my bed and pulled on my boots, moving with deliberate stealth. The duffel bag was packed and ready, but there were still things throughout the house I needed to collect, things that were unquestionably mine that I couldn't leave behind. First stop, the hallway closet. On the top shelf, behind old board games and photo albums, was a fireproof document box. Inside were certificates from my trade school, award ribbons from woodworking competitions, and most importantly, a folder containing every receipt for tools I'd purchased over the years. I'd always been methodical about keeping records, a habit Grandpa Harold had instilled in me. "Documentation saves arguments," he used to say. Now those carefully preserved papers might be the only proof I had of what was stolen from me. Next, I crept down to the kitchen. In the back of the junk drawer was an envelope containing $800 in cash, my emergency fund that no one else knew about. I slipped it into my wallet, then carefully extracted my personal cooking knives from the block on the counter. They weren't woodworking tools, but they were high-quality Japanese steel that I'd saved for months to buy. I wrapped them in a dish towel and added them to my bag. As I moved through the darkened house, I felt like a ghost present, but somehow already gone. This place had never fully felt like mine, I realized. I'd always been the square peg in my family's round hole, tolerated but never truly understood. My phone vibrated with a text from Marcus. "Here, park down the block." Before heading out, I had one more crucial stop: the attic. Moving with painstaking care to avoid the creaky sixth step, I made my way up the stairs and eased open the attic door. The musty space was illuminated only by moonlight filtering through a small window, but I knew exactly where to go. Behind stacked Christmas decorations and old suitcases was a wooden chest I'd hidden 2 years ago. Inside was Grandpa Harold's original toolbox, the one he'd given me on my 13th birthday. It wasn't valuable in monetary terms. The tools inside were basic and well-worn, but its sentimental worth was incalculable. I'd moved it to the attic when I upgraded to professional equipment, keeping it safe as a reminder of where I'd started. My father, in his haste to liquidate my toys, hadn't known about this hidden treasure. I lifted the box carefully, cradling it like a precious relic, which in many ways it was. It represented the seed from which my passion had grown, and now, ironically, it would be the foundation from which I would rebuild. With the toolbox secure, I made one final sweep of my bedroom, ensuring I'd left nothing essential behind. My gaze lingered on the furniture I'd built over the years, the desk, bookshelf, and bed frame that represented some of my earliest serious projects. I had to leave them. They were too large to transport, and technically, since they were fixtures in the house, could be considered my parents' property. I did, however, remove the hand-carved drawer pulls from my desk's small woodland creatures I'd spent weeks perfecting. They slipped easily into my pocket, small tokens of my craftsmanship that my father couldn't sell. Outside, the night air was cool and still. Marcus's truck idled quietly down the block, its outline barely visible in the darkness. I loaded my belongings quickly, then returned for one final task. The backyard shed, my former workshop, was now just an empty shell, but the small storage space attached to it still contained materials I'd purchased: lumber in various stages of completion, specialty veneers, hardware for upcoming projects, and finishes. These were unquestionably mine, paid for with my own money, often for specific client commissions. Marcus helped me load everything we could fit into his truck. We worked in silence, communicating with nods and gestures, like thieves in the night, though the irony wasn't lost on me that I was merely reclaiming what was already mine. As we finished, I took one last look at the house where I'd spent my entire life. No lights had come on. No one had stirred. My departure was as unnoticed as my passion had been unappreciated. "You okay?" Marcus asked quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "No," I admitted, "but I will be." We drove away without a backward glance. No note explaining my absence. No dramatic goodbye. Just the quiet dignity of removing myself from a situation where I wasn't valued or respected. During the drive to Marcus's apartment, I sent emails to my current clients explaining that due to unforeseen circumstances, their projects would be slightly delayed, but still completed. I didn't share details of the family drama, just assured them that their commissions remained my priority, despite a temporary workshop relocation. By the time we arrived at Marcus's place, it was nearly 3 in the morning. We unloaded my belongings into his spare room and garage, creating a makeshift living space and workshop in one exhausting hour. Finally, physically and emotionally drained, I collapsed onto the couch that would be my bed for the foreseeable future. Despite the upheaval, despite the betrayal and loss, I felt something unexpected: relief. The crushing weight of trying to earn my father's respect, a battle I now realized I could never win, had lifted. As sleep finally claimed me, my last conscious thought was of Grandpa Harold and what he might say about this situation. Sometimes I could almost hear him whisper, "You have to tear down before you can build something stronger." I awakened to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting feeling of not immediately knowing where I was. Reality rushed back as I recognized Marcus's living room, the events of the previous day crashing over me like a cold wave. My phone, plugged in beside the couch, showed 27 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most were from my mother, growing increasingly frantic. "Alan, where are you? Please come home so we can talk. We're worried sick." My father's messages were fewer but evolved from commanding to threatening. "Come home immediately. This behavior is completely unacceptable. If you've taken anything from the shed, you need to return it now." The most interesting messages, however, were from my brother Kyle. "Dude, what the hell happened? The house is chaos. Mom's having a meltdown. Dad's losing his mind about the shed. Did you seriously leave? I don't blame you. What they did was messed up. Call me when you can. I'm on your side." I texted Kyle back first. "I'm safe. We'll call later. Thanks for understanding." To my parents, I sent only one message. "I'm safe, but I won't be coming back. Everything I took belongs to me." Then I silenced my phone, placed it on the coffee table, and went to find Marcus. He was in the kitchen, making coffee and scrambling eggs, as if having a friend crash on his couch after a family implosion was perfectly normal. "Morning, refugee," he said, sliding a mug of coffee across the counter. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I expected," I admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Thanks for everything, man." "Don't mention it," Marcus said, waving away my thanks. "So, what's the plan for day 1 of your independence?" The question brought me sharply back to practical reality. I needed to formulate a strategy not just for the immediate future, but for rebuilding everything I'd lost. "First, I need to secure my money before my dad tries something stupid," I said. "Then I'll head to Monarch to talk to Frank about increasing my hours. After that, I need to set up some kind of functional workspace in your garage to handle my outstanding commissions." "Use whatever space you need," Marcus offered. "My car can stay in the driveway for a while." After breakfast, I headed to my bank and withdrew my entire savings, just over $30,000, then opened a new account at a different bank where my parents had no relationship. I wasn't taking chances with the money I'd worked so hard to save. Next stop was Monarch Woodcraft. Frank was waiting for me, his weathered face creased with concern. "You look like hell, kid," he said by way of greeting. "Feel like it too," I admitted. We sat in his small office as I explained everything that had happened since my birthday morning. Frank listened intently, occasionally swearing under his breath. "I've known your father for years through the Chamber of Commerce," he said when I finished. "Always struck me as a man who confused status with success." He leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "Here's what I can offer. 30 hours a week, effective immediately. You can use the shop after hours for your commissions until you get back on your feet. And I have some older tools in storage that aren't pretty, but they work. They're yours if you want them." The generosity nearly broke me. After my family's betrayal, Frank's practical support was a lifeline. "I don't know how to thank you," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "Thank me by proving your old man wrong," Frank replied simply. "Build something extraordinary." By mid-afternoon, I'd established a temporary workflow. My phone continued to vibrate with messages from my parents, which I continued to ignore. Around 4, Kyle called. And this time I answered. "Holy shit, Alan," he said without preamble. "It's absolute chaos here." "What's happening?" I asked, stepping outside the shop for privacy. "Mom woke up and checked your room this morning. When she found it empty, she completely lost it. She's been crying all day, convinced you've been kidnapped or something. Dad was just angry at first, saying you were being dramatic. And then he went out to the shed to show me something. and found it completely emptied. I've never seen him so mad. He's been ranting about ungrateful children and threatening to call the police about stolen property. I felt a flicker of satisfaction at my father's rage, quickly followed by guilt about my mother's distress. Mom didn't deserve to be scared like that, I admitted. But I couldn't stay, Kyle. I know, he said quietly. What they did was wrong. Really wrong. I had no idea they were planning to sell your tools. I would have tried to stop them. The solidarity from my brother eased some of the pain. At least someone in my family recognized the magnitude of the violation. Where are you staying? Kyle asked. With Marcus for now. I'm working on a more permanent solution. Do you need money? I've got some saved from my summer internship. The offer touched me deeply. I'm okay financially. But thanks, little brother. That means a lot. After hanging up, I turned my attention to setting up Marcus's garage. It was far from ideal, poorly insulated, with limited power outlets and no dust collection system, but it was a space where I could work. Frank's loan tools, combined with Grandpa Harold's basic set, gave me enough to start tackling my outstanding commissions, albeit more slowly than before. That evening, my phone rang with my mother's number for the 20th time. Something made me answer. Alan? Her voice was thin with tears. Alan, please come home. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out, Mom, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. You and Dad sold my tools without my permission. You sold items that belonged to me, including irreplaceable gifts from Grandpa Harold. We needed the money, she said weakly. Your father's business hasn't been doing well. We're behind on bills. Kyle's tuition increased. We were desperate. The revelation about my father's business troubles was new information, but it didn't change the fundamental breach of trust. You could have talked to me, I said. I would have helped. I always have. Your father wouldn't allow it, she admitted. He didn't want you to know about our financial problems. His pride cost me $15,000 in equipment, I said bluntly, and now it's cost him a son. Please don't say that, she begged. We're still family. Family doesn't steal from each other, Mom. I need time. After hanging up, I sat in Marcus's garage, surrounded by the meager remnants of my once well-equipped workshop. My mother's revelation explained their actions but didn't excuse them. If anything, it made my father's behavior even more inexcusable, sacrificing my future to protect his ego. I picked up one of Grandpa Harold's old hand planes, running my fingers over the worn wooden handle polished by years of use. Guess we're starting over, I murmured to the tool, and to myself. Later that night, as I lay on Marcus's couch, staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. You had no right to empty that shed. Those materials were purchased under my roof. I typed a response, deleted it, then typed a new one. Everything I took, I paid for with my own money. I have receipts for all of it. Don't contact me again unless you're ready to apologize and make restitution for my stolen tools. Then I blocked his number. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. The first week of independence was a grueling adjustment. Each morning, I woke before dawn to spend 2 hours working in Marcus's garage before heading to my expanded shift at Monarch Woodcraft. Evenings were dedicated to more client work, often until midnight or later. The primitive setup meant tasks that once took minutes now required hours, and my hands were soon covered in blisters and cuts from working with unfamiliar, lower-quality tools. Despite the challenges, there was a fierce satisfaction in proving I could continue without my parents' support, that my craft wasn't just a hobby that could be discarded at the first sign of financial pressure. Financial reality quickly set in. I opened my laptop and created a detailed budget spreadsheet. Rent would be my biggest immediate expense once I found my own place. Then utilities, food, health insurance, which had been covered under my parents' plan, transportation costs, and the gradual replacement of essential tools. Even with my increased hours at Monarch, the numbers were tight. I would need to be strategic about which tools to replace first. The table saw was essential but expensive. Perhaps I could make do with a circular saw and guide system temporarily. The router was critical for the detailed edge work my clients expected. Hand tools could be acquired gradually as specific projects demanded them. On the 5th day after leaving home, something unexpected happened. I was sanding a table edge in Marcus's garage when a truck pulled up outside. A man I'd never seen before stepped out, followed by another carrying a large box between them. "You, Alan?" the first man asked. Yes, I replied cautiously. Frank Delgado sent us, said you could use these. They set down the box, which I now saw contained a professional-grade router and accessory kit. There's more in the truck. By the time they finished unloading, Marcus's garage contained a modest but functional collection of tools, all loaned or donated by various craftsmen from around the city. Word of my situation had spread through the tight-knit woodworking community, and they had rallied around one of their own. A note from Frank explained, "These come from guys who remember what it's like to start with nothing. Use them as long as you need. Pay it forward someday." I sat on a sawdust-covered stool after the delivery truck left, overwhelmed by the generosity of people who owed me nothing. This, I realized, was true family not defined by blood but by shared passion and mutual respect. The temporary workshop setup allowed me to tackle my backlogged commissions with renewed efficiency. Each completed piece represented not just income, but a small victory proof that my father's actions hadn't destroyed my ability to create. 10 days after my departure, Kyle showed up unannounced at Monarch Woodcraft, just as my shift was ending. "Hey," he said awkwardly, hands shoved in his pockets. "Thought I'd check on you." We walked to a nearby diner, where Kyle slid a backpack across the booth to me. "What's this?" I asked. "Some of your stuff. Photos from when we were kids. Your high school yearbooks. That wooden box Grandpa Harold made for your 18th birthday. I figured you'd want them." Inside the backpack was indeed a careful selection of mementos. I hadn't been able to take that night items with purely sentimental value that I'd regretted leaving behind. "Thanks, Kyle," I said, genuinely moved by his thoughtfulness. "How are things at home?" He sighed heavily. "Tense. Mom cries a lot. Dad vacillates between anger and this weird silence where he just stares at the wall. Neither of them will actually discuss what happened with me directly." "And what do you think about what happened?" I asked, curious about his perspective. Kyle met my eyes directly. "I think they were wrong. Completely wrong. Dad's always been controlling. But this crossed a line. They had no right to sell your tools." His straightforward support meant more than he could know. "Have they said anything about me? Mom asks if I've heard from you almost hourly." "Dad." Kyle hesitated. "Dad tries to justify what they did, says you overreacted. But I can tell he knows he messed up. He's just too proud to admit it." That sounded exactly like Richard Marshall, a man who'd rather lose a relationship than acknowledge a mistake. "I'm looking for an apartment," I told Kyle. "Nothing fancy, just somewhere close to work with enough space for a small workshop." "You're really not coming back?" "It wasn't a question." "I can't, Kyle. Not after this. I need to build my own life." He nodded slowly. "I get it. Just don't shut me out, okay? I'm still your brother. Always, I promised." The following week brought a promising development, a small apartment within walking distance of Monarch Woodcraft. The rent was reasonable, and most importantly, it included a detached single-car garage that the landlord was willing to let me convert into a workshop. I signed the lease immediately, using some of my savings for the security deposit and first month's rent. Moving from Marcus's couch to my own place marked a significant milestone in my new independence. The apartment itself was basic, just a studio with a kitchenette and bathroom, but it was mine, earned through my own work, without family strings attached. The garage transformation became my obsession. I installed proper electrical outlets, insulation, and lighting. A workbench built from reclaimed lumber spanned one wall. Shelving units salvaged from a closing retail store provided storage. It wasn't the workshop I'd lost, but it was functional, and crucially, secure from anyone who might decide to sell its contents. 3 weeks after my birthday, an unexpected email arrived from a local architecture firm. They had seen a dining table I'd crafted for one of their employees and wanted to discuss a potential contract for custom conference tables for their new office space. It would be my largest commission to date, enough to replace several of my most critical tools if I secured it. The meeting went well, but highlighted the limitations of my current setup. They needed the tables in 6 weeks, a timeline I could have easily met with my previous equipment but would struggle to achieve now. As I was explaining the situation to Frank that afternoon, my phone rang with my mother's number. I'd unblocked her the previous week, though we'd spoken only briefly. "Alan, I need to talk to you," she said without preamble. "In person, please." Something in her voice, a quiet desperation, made me agree to meet her at a coffee shop halfway between my new apartment and my parents' house. She was already there when I arrived, looking smaller somehow, her hands wrapped around a mug as if seeking warmth despite the mild weather. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat across from her. "What did you want to talk about?" She took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something about your father. Something I should have told you before." She explained that my father's investment firm had been struggling for nearly 2 years. A series of poor decisions had cost them several major clients. They'd remortgaged the house, depleted their savings, and maxed out credit cards trying to maintain appearances while the business hemorrhaged money. "He didn't want anyone to know," she said. "Especially not you children." His pride. "It wouldn't allow him to admit failure, so he sold my tools instead," I said flatly. "It was wrong," she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "I knew it was wrong when we did it. I should have stopped him, should have insisted we talk to you first. I have no excuse." Her admission was the first genuine acknowledgement from either parent of the magnitude of their betrayal. "I can't replace what we took," she continued, "but I brought this." She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $3,000, not nearly enough to replace my tools, but a substantial sum nonetheless. "It's from my personal savings," she explained. "Your father doesn't know. It's not enough, I know that. But it's a start toward making amends." I stared at the check, conflicted. Taking it felt like forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. Refusing it would hurt someone who was genuinely trying to make things right. "I appreciate the gesture, Mom," I said finally, "but this doesn't fix what happened." "I know," she whispered. "I just hope someday you can forgive us. Forgive me." I pocketed the check, making no promises. The money would help replace essential tools, and I recognized the courage it had taken for her to go against my father's wishes. As we parted, she hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Alan. I always have been. I should have said it more often." I walked away with mixed emotions, still hurt, still angry, but with the first fragile threads of potential reconciliation, at least with my mother. My father was another matter entirely. That evening, as I worked in my garage workshop on a prototype for the architecture firm, I realized something profound. Despite everything, the betrayal, the loss, the abrupt severing of family ties, I was still creating, still building. My hands still knew what to do, even with unfamiliar tools. My father had taken my equipment, but he hadn't taken my skill or my determination. Those, I was discovering, were the true foundations of my craft. 6 months passed in a blur of long workdays, client meetings, and gradual rebuilding. The check from my mother had gone directly toward replacing my most essential tools, starting with a quality table saw and router system. The architecture firm contract had been a turning point, leading to additional commercial work that paid substantially better than individual commissions. My tiny apartment garage had proven too small for my growing business, so I'd taken a calculated risk and leased a small commercial space 3 blocks from Monarch Woodcraft. Frank had reduced my hours at the shop, supporting my transition to full-time self-employment with characteristic gruff encouragement. "Always knew you had it in you," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Just didn't expect the kick in the pants to come from your own father." The new workshop, Allen Marshall Woodcraft, now officially registered as an LLC, was nothing fancy, but it was mine in a way my converted shed had never been. Each tool had been carefully selected and purchased with my own hard-earned money. The walls displayed photos of completed projects and satisfied clients, tangible evidence of reputation and craftsmanship growing despite the setback. I'd maintained regular contact with Kyle, who visited the workshop weekly, sometimes helping with simple tasks while we talked. My mother and I spoke occasionally, our conversations gradually becoming less strained, though we carefully avoided certain topics. My father remained a spectral absence in these discussions, unmentioned but ever present in the negative space of our conversation. I hadn't spoken to him since that final text exchanged the night I left. That changed on a Tuesday morning when a certified letter arrived at my workshop. Inside was a formal demand on my father's company letterhead, claiming I had absconded with property belonging to Richard and Elizabeth Marshall, and demanding either the return of said property or payment of $5,000, ironically, the exact amount they'd received for selling my tools. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled threat of legal action if I failed to comply within 30 days. I laughed out loud in the empty workshop, the sound echoing off the high ceiling. The audacity was almost impressive. After stealing and selling $15,000 worth of my possessions, My father was demanding payment for the materials I'd taken, materials I could prove I'd purchased myself. I forwarded the letter to Leila Santos, a lawyer I'd met through the local small business association who had helped me establish my LLC. Her response was swift and unequivocal. "This is legally laughable. Let me handle it." 2 weeks later, she sent my father a comprehensive response. The 15-page document included copies of receipts for every tool sold, affidavits from Frank and other professional woodworkers attesting to my ownership, a detailed inventory of what I'd taken from the shed, with accompanying receipts, and a counter-demand for the difference between the actual value of my sold tools and the amount my mother had already partially repaid. "He has no case," Leila assured me. "This is just intimidation, and not very good intimidation at that." She was right. No further legal communications arrived, though Kyle reported that our father had been in a towering rage after receiving the response, followed by several days of unusual silence. I assumed that would be the end of it, a final, failed attempt to exert control over me through legal threats. I was wrong. On a Saturday afternoon a month later, I was sanding the edges of a walnut dining table when the workshop door opened. Standing there, looking deeply uncomfortable, was my father. "Alan," he said stiffly. I set down the sanding block slowly, wiping dust from my hands. "Dad, this is unexpected." He looked around the workshop, taking in the organized tools, the projects in various stages of completion, the framed article from the local business journal featuring my custom conference tables. "Your mother suggested I come," he admitted. "Said I needed to see what you've built." "And what do you think?" I asked, gesturing to the space around us. He cleared his throat. "It's more substantial than I expected." Coming from Richard Marshall, this qualified as effusive praise. "Why are you really here, Dad? The legal threats didn't work. So you've moved on to what? Reconnaissance?" He flinched slightly at my directness. "I'm here because your mother hasn't stopped crying for 6 months. Because Kyle barely speaks to me. Because he faltered, clearly struggling with words that didn't come naturally to him. "Because I may have made a miscalculation." "A miscalculation," I repeated flatly. "Is that what you call selling someone's livelihood without their permission?" "We needed the money," he began, then stopped himself. "No, that's not. I'm not here to justify what happened. Your lawyer made it abundantly clear that what we did was legally questionable at best." "And morally?" I pressed. He looked away. "I did what I thought was necessary for the family." "No. You did what was necessary to avoid admitting to your family that your business was failing," I corrected. "You sacrificed my future to protect your pride." "That's not," he started, then sighed heavily. Perhaps there's some truth to that. Coming from my father, this was the equivalent of falling to his knees in apology. "Kyle tells me you're doing well," he said, changing the subject. "Says you have corporate clients now." "I do," I confirmed. "The architecture firm contract led to others. I'm establishing a reputation for quality commercial furniture." He nodded, looking at the nearly completed dining table. "This is good work. Very good." Another compliment. I was beginning to wonder if he was ill. "What do you want from me, Dad?" I asked directly. "Why are you really here?" He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. "This is a cashier's check for $12,000. It represents the difference between what your mother already gave you and the full value of the tools we sold, based on your lawyer's valuation." I stared at the envelope, making no move to take it. "It's not a trick, Alan," he said, setting it on the edge of my workbench. "It's restitution. And an acknowledgement." "An acknowledgement of what?" He gestured around the workshop again. "That this is real. That what you've built here is legitimate. That perhaps I was wrong in my assessment of your career choice." From Richard Marshall, this was practically self-flagellation. "It took you losing me to recognize that?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "I'm not good at admitting mistakes," he said simply. "It's a flaw, one that's cost me a great deal, it seems." We stood in awkward silence for several long moments. "I don't expect this to fix everything," he finally continued. "I don't expect you to move back home or pretend nothing happened. But your mother misses you desperately. Kyle misses his brother. And he paused, visibly struggling. "I find I miss my son." The words hung in the air between us, fragile and unexpected. "I can't just forget what happened," I said eventually. "I'm not asking you to," he replied. "I'm asking for a chance to rebuild, like you've done here." He gestured to the workshop again. I considered his words carefully. The man standing before me was still Richard Marshall, stubborn, proud, and fundamentally convinced of his own rightness. But he was also, for perhaps the first time in my memory, making a genuine effort to reach across a divide he had created. "I can't promise anything," I said finally, "but I'll think about it." He nodded, accepting this as the most he could hope for. "Your mother would like to see your new place. Perhaps dinner sometime?" "Perhaps," I agreed noncommittally. After he left, I sat on my workbench, turning the cashier's check over in my hands. The amount represented a full financial acknowledgement of the wrong they'd done. Even if my father couldn't quite bring himself to articulate a complete apology, I realized that I no longer felt the burning anger that had consumed me 6 months earlier. It had been replaced by something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of freedom. In forcing me out, my father had inadvertently forced me forward, accelerating the independence I might have taken years to achieve otherwise. The tools I'd so painstakingly collected and lost had been replaced by new ones. The workshop I'd created in their shed had been supplanted by a commercial space with my name on the lease. The dream I'd been slowly working toward had become reality, forged in the crucible of necessity rather than the comfort of gradual transition. In losing everything, I'd found something more valuable, the knowledge that I could rebuild from nothing, that my craft existed in my hands and mind, not in any collection of tools, however precious. That true support came from people who valued my passion, not from those who merely tolerated it. These lessons hadn't come easily, and the path forward with my family remained uncertain. But as I looked around at the workshop I'd created truly mine in every sense, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey, difficult as it had been. I picked up my sanding block and returned to the dining table, running my hands over the wood grain with newfound appreciation. Each piece I created now carried not just craftsmanship but resilience, the tangible evidence of a life rebuilt from the ground up. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what can't be taken away. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about a time when you had to start over or stand up for yourself against people who should have supported you. Have you ever had to rebuild something important from scratch? What did the experience teach you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found value in this journey, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they too can rebuild after loss. Remember, true strength isn't about never falling, it's about how you rise after being knocked down.